Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 53 of the Pet Behaviour Chat. And just like that, we're in year 2 of this podcast, which is super exciting. And I want to chat about a topic today that was actually inspired by a Facebook post that I saw. So just in one of our kind of local doggy Facebook groups, there was a dog owner who asked about their dog, who obviously has signs of separation-related behaviors and was being kind of destructive in the home, which is one of the sort of top signs of separation-related behaviors or separation anxiety, and was asking for advice on the group on what she could do to stop her little doggy being destructive when home alone. And I was so surprised to see a huge number of people, really quite a lot of people, giving the advice to just get a crate, put the dog in the crate when the dog's left home alone, and that would solve all of their issues of destructiveness, and that would be kind of the solution to the problem. And I was really surprised at how strong of an opinion a lot of people have, although I probably shouldn't really be surprised, because we do get a lot of people sharing a lot of opinions that aren't necessarily in the best interests of the animals on various topics. I'll leave it at that. But this post really kind of touched me, because I was really concerned for the dog, and the idea that the owner who was, I'm sure, extremely well-intentioned, was going to go out, get a crate, pop the dog in the crate, and that would be sort of the end of thinking about what the dog actually needs in terms of their separation anxiety. So I thought I'd do this little post about this little podcast about to crate or not to crate, because I think, I think a lot of people probably think that having a crate and just popping the dog in a crate is a good solution to separation related behaviors. And I want to just give my thoughts on that, give my ideas on that, and maybe explain why it's not necessarily the best option. I think crates can absolutely be a really useful tool. However, it has to be done in the right way, and it has to be done as part of a comprehensive treatment plan. And we need to look at other things that are, much more than just popping the dog in a crate and, that's the end of the story and that's the solution, and everything will be fine. So I think the first thing I want to touch upon is the importance of understanding what separation anxiety actually is. And I have another podcast episode on separation anxiety, which I believe is episode 32, but I'll definitely put it in the show notes, that kind of delves a little bit into, what is separation anxiety, and the fact that in its sort of truest sense, it really is a distress behavior. It's, a panic related behavior, almost a panic attack that the dog has at being separated from their main caregivers. That can be when the dog is left completely home alone, but it can be, as much as the dog panicking when the owner is just in a different room in the same house and they don't have access to their bonded person. So it's truly a mental and emotional health disorder. And we need to really think about the dog's emotional state when they're showing these behaviors. And I believe that, just putting them into a crate is doing the dog a massive disservice, because we're not actually addressing how they're feeling and their emotional state that might be underlying that. And I'll touch on that a little bit more as we go kind of through the podcast. But the other really big thing that I think is massively important is we need to get an accurate diagnosis. And separation related behaviors is kind of a big umbrella term for behaviors that dogs can do when they are either separated from their main caregiver, left home alone. And there can be quite a lot of different causes for that. Absolutely. Again, the classic presentation is this panic, grief, distress behavior. But it could also be that the dog is perhaps showing signs of confinement related distress. So maybe dogs that are put into crates, they really struggle with that confinement piece we take a bit away their control, we take away their choice, we take away their ability to kind of roam freely in the home. And that in itself can be a problem. So as you can imagine, if the diagnosis is actually confinement-related distress, and we then enforce that confinement on the dog, we could actually be making things a lot worse. And this goes back to, the really important piece of getting an accurate diagnosis. I think this is so important. And I think that all these probably, again, well-meaning people that are giving advice on the internet, on Facebook, in groups, maybe don't think quite as far as there could be a number of different reasons why the dog is showing these behaviors, and that it's absolutely essential that we get a good diagnosis, that we get the correct diagnosis to be able to actually successfully treat this problem. Because if we don't, we could be making things worse, or we actually just don't manage to get a good result in terms of the behavior change. So I think that's really, really important. And getting an accurate diagnosis is sometimes not that easy. We often trawl through, hours of video to actually see, what is the dog doing? Are there environmental triggers that cause them to show the behaviors? Are they perhaps quite calm initially when the pet parent leaves? And then, there's something that happens in the environment, maybe a loud noise or something that causes them to become fearful or get a fright. And that's when those separation related behaviors kick in, because all of a sudden they don't have that person there to reassure them and to give them that sense of safety. So getting a diagnosis is not an easy piece of the puzzle. And it takes quite a lot of observational skills, looking at all the different options, looking at all the different possibilities to try and understand, what could be going on here, and what do we actually need to address in order to make this problem better. So I think that's the first really big piece, is getting that diagnosis piece. And in this particular case, with this little doggy, if we did have confinement related distress, that would be a problem, and that could actually make things worse, and that could massively impact that dog's welfare, quality of life, all those things. And obviously that's absolutely what we don't want. So getting that diagnosis is massively important. And it's not enough, and it's not helpful to make these blanket statements of just get a crate and just put them in the crate in order to solve this problem. The second thing I think that's really important to consider is, how does the dog actually feel about a crate? So if we did decide that maybe a crate was an option, and I'm going to say that, some of my treatment plans absolutely include providing a safe place, providing something like a crate. But again, we can't just get a crate, pop it up in our living room and pop the dog inside. It requires training, it requires familiarization, it requires the dog to actually see that crate as a safe place, as somewhere that they can feel comfortable, relaxed, safe, and be okay sort of snoozing in there whilst their people are out of the home. And again, that requires preparation, time, support of a really good trainer, maybe a veterinary behaviorist, to actually understand how dogs feel around crates. And I'm going to say that, many dogs that show separation related behaviors are dogs that have perhaps not had the most ideal start in life. So they've maybe come from pet shops, or they've maybe come from shelters. Separation anxiety is really overrepresented in dogs that have come from a shelter environment. And you can imagine that those dogs might have actually formed quite a negative association to being confined, either in a pen, a crate, a kennel, whatever it might be. And all of a sudden, we're bringing something very similar to that, or very like that, back into their home. And, that could have massively negative implications from a fear, anxiety, stress, mental and emotional health point of view. So understanding how the dog feels about the crate before we even consider whether that might be a good option and a good part of our treatment plan is massively, massively important. And I think, we really need to, again, look at this in a holistic point of view. And we always need to look at the animal's emotional state. We need to assess their body language. Are they resistant to the crate? Do they feel quite fearful just about the presence of the crate in the home? Do they willingly go up to it? If they don't naturally go inside, how can we teach them that in a really, really sympathetic way? So it's important to understand that piece of the puzzle before we decide to just kind of, pop a crate in the home, pop the dog inside, job done. So crate training is another really, really important piece. I want to go back to that emotional state that I touched on earlier. So as we know, and as I said, separation anxiety, separation distress, separation related distress, whatever you want to call it, can be really quite a debilitating mental and emotional health piece. And it would be absolutely remiss of us not to address that. So just kind of suppressing behavior or taking away the opportunity to perform some of those behaviors is absolutely not enough. Yes, if we put the dog in a crate, we might reduce destruction, we might reduce elimination behaviors, but is that really going to help us in the long run? Is that really, if we think about sort of a longevity point of view, is that really going to make a difference going forward over the next months, years, the lifetime of the dog that it's with, their owners? Is that really going to be the right thing? Or do we need to address this from a more comprehensive picture? Do we need to address their physical health? Do we need to address their ability to be independent? Do we need to give them better coping strategies? Do we need to teach them that they can feel safe and comfortable without the presence of their owners? And we do a lot of work on this when we actually look at separation cases. So we have a number of tools in our toolkit where we'll actually teach the dog that they can disengage from their people. They can find pleasure and passion for something that is away from their person. And we can really teach them coping skills, which they're going to benefit from much more in the long run than just a suppression of behavior or a reduced opportunity to perform unwanted behaviors. So I think that's a really, really important piece, especially if we're looking at the quality of life of the dog, if we're looking at the welfare of the animal, if we're looking at their overall life experience, whether they're pessimistic or optimistic in life in general. And there have been some really nice studies looking at, optimism and pessimism in separation anxiety and how that changes when they're actually treated properly, sometimes with the help of psychopharmaceuticals and behavior medications. So again, it's a big piece, and it really requires the input of a professional, whether that's a veterinary behaviorist like myself, or whether that is a non-vet behaviorist that has a really good grasp on these things. So yeah, I think, those pieces are really, really important. And then finally, I just want to touch on sort of some of the kind of classic signs of separation related behaviors. We know that we have, a couple of sort of big signs that we see in most cases, and then we have a number of kind of adjunctive or smaller signs that we see in some cases. So I'd say the big ones are vocalization. I'm sure anybody who has lived with a dog that's had separation related behaviors know that the barking, whining, crying is a really common presentation. And it's often the thing that actually will cause people to search for help, because they get complaints perhaps from neighbors if they're living in apartments. They actually hear their dogs vocalizing if they have cameras on, and it can be really distressing to hear a dog that's in distress like that. So the vocalization is the number one sort of big piece. Number two, we have elimination. So that could be urination and defecation. And that's something that can be suppressed by putting them in a crate, just because dogs usually don't want to eliminate in their resting places. But if we're suppressing the behavior, that doesn't necessarily mean we're actually addressing the core problem. So yes, it might be a quick fix in the moment, and it might, relieve some of the owner frustration at coming home to find accidents all over the house. But again, we're not addressing that kind of core piece. The third sign that we often see is destruction, which is what was the case for this little doggy on Facebook here. The owners would come home to destruction, and destruction can range from quite mild things. I saw a dog the other day that would just rip up tissues. So would find tissues around the house and would just kind of rip up tissues. That was that dog's form of destruction. But it can go as far as chewing furniture, destroying, shoes, handbags, the remote control, flip-flops, whatever it might be. And even to the point where the dog can be so destructive that they try to dig or chew through doors in order to have an escape route to be reunited with their caregiver. So destruction sits on a really wide spectrum. And if we confine some of these dogs to a crate, they may still be very destructive to the crate. So I've seen dogs literally chew through the bars of these metal wire cages. They can often do a lot of damage to themselves. I've seen fractured teeth, bleeding gums, torn nails, you name it. It can be very extreme to the point of becoming self-injurious, which obviously we absolutely want to avoid. So just by putting the dog in a crate doesn't necessarily mean we're going to completely stop those destructive behaviors, depending on the form that those destructive behaviors take on. So I think, that's a really important point to consider. Yes, it's possible that if we're on the milder kind of end of destruction and the dog's destroying, furniture or other things in the home, that we might be able to just suppress that behavior. But again, we're not addressing the actual underlying cause and the underlying motivational state that the dog is displaying. So, so those, I think, are the kind of big three, right? Vocalization, elimination, and then destruction. And then we have a number of other signs that we can see, and that can range from pacing. That's quite a common one. So many dogs cope with separation by kind of pacing at the front door, pacing the perimeter of the home. They're often on the lookout for their people coming home. So we'll often see dogs kind of sitting on the sofa, looking outside the window to see, when is my person coming back home? And again, if we're creating them, we're shutting down and eliminating some of those behaviors, but it could be that behavior in that moment is actually helping that dog to cope. And, we might even want to consider allowing some of those behaviors as we put into place a more comprehensive treatment plan, because in that moment, it is a coping mechanism. And if they're created, we're just kind of shutting that down. So pacing, we can get hypersalivation. Some dogs go as far as kind of actually getting sick, having vomiting and diarrhea when they're separated. Hypersalivation, I think I said, they can get very shut down. They can kind of go into this state of learned helplessness where they just withdraw from everything and they're not actually, interacting with their environment normally. We can get some dogs that even show signs of aggressive behaviors as the owners leave. So there are a whole host of other things that dogs can do, but certainly vocalization, elimination, and destruction would be our kind of big ones to be looking out for. And I guess it is always about balancing the needs of the pet owner and the pet. But I think, having that professional support, educating the clients on what's actually going on with their pet in that moment, it goes a really long way to creating a sense of empathy. Not just being angry at the dog for destroying furniture, but actually creating that sense of empathy and understanding for what the dog is actually going through from a mental and emotional ill health point of view. So I think, those are my sort of main thoughts about crating. And, the internet can be a really dangerous place. And I feel that the internet can be a really dangerous place for our pets. And while I understand that people are wanting to help and they're best intentioned, and sometimes they're kind of trying to display maybe their knowledge or maybe say what's worked for them in the past, I'm not sure that they're always doing right by the animals that are on the receiving end of some of those suggestions. So we see a lot of separation related behavior cases. We work them up very, very meticulously. We're very focused on making sure that we get the right diagnosis and then really addressing the problem in a comprehensive way. We have our multimodal treatment plans that encompass a lot of different factors. And yeah, that might mean at some point, during the course of the dog's treatment plan or treatment process, there might be a crate involved at some point, or there might be a different safe place involved. There could be a certain room that the dog goes in, whether that's, with a shut door or just with a shut baby gate, where they have everything they need and where they can actually feel more comfortable and more peaceful. But it takes time to get them to the point where they're able to accept that. We want to reduce global fear in general. We want to make sure that, their everyday life, even when the owner is there, is looking as comfortable as possible. So we will often work with psychopharmaceutical medications. We have 2 medications that are actually licensed for dogs for separation anxiety. And we use a lot of different training methods to teach that independence, to teach those coping skills, to allow the dog to feel that they can absolutely be okay if their person isn't there. And it very much depends on the extent of the dog's sort of signs, whether it's confined to just the home or whether they also get stressed in the car when their person gets out of the car, whether we have, the dog being anxious only when they're very much home alone, or even, if the person is in a different room, as I mentioned earlier. We identify whether it is separation related behavior to one specific person, or if any warm body, we say that any warm body will do, right? So as long as there's somebody around and with the dog, they're actually able to cope. So there are lots and lots of things that go into it. So I think a blanket statement of just get a crate, put them in the crate, and that's your problem solved is not the right approach. And we absolutely are doing our pets a disservice. So I would be really keen to hear your thoughts. I'm sure, many people perhaps have had short wins with confinement and crates. But again, it's always looking at the long-term quality of life of that pet. So as vets, we want to make sure, I'm always thinking about how is this animal going to have the best quality of life for the most years possible. We want to make sure that, we extend their lifespan and that we can provide a good quality of life for as many years as possible, both for the pet and also for the owners, because the owners want to have their pets for many, many years, for as long as possible. And we know that chronic states of anxiety, living with anxiety, can absolutely shorten their lifespan. So that's another reason that I'm very keen to look at that in a holistic way. So leave me your thoughts, drop me a line in the comments. I'm going to put a couple of papers in the show notes relating to separation related behaviors, and, how we kind of think about that as veterinary behaviorists and how we go ahead and sort of treat those. But yeah, those are my thoughts on to crate or not to crate. And I just thought it was an important point to discuss, just because of the many, many opinions, I guess, that there are out there on social media. And I want to provide an informed and science-based opinion on that hopefully people can go to and get a bit of a better understanding. All right, everybody, that was episode 53, our first one in the new year. I'm super excited to be back for year 2. And I really look forward to seeing you next week for episode 54. Bye for now.